folks, we're in the grounds of a derelict hospital that was built over 100 years ago. Just in front of me is the hospital chapel. It was built in 1928.
And it was in 1928 that a doctor who lived not far from here discovered something that changed the course of history, saved millions of lives, and has probably affected you and your family at some point or another.
But all of those amazing and wonderful things almost never happened because of a mistake that he made.
And it's that same mistake that marketeers and sellers are making over and over again today, and it's killing the growth of your business.
The man we're talking about, of course, is Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin in 1928 while he was working in St Mary's Hospital in London. And it was purely by chance. Before he went on vacation that year, he'd left petri dishes, like these ones, full of bacteria. And when he returned from vacation, he found that one of these dishes was contaminated. There was a bit of mould growing in the dish. But what was remarkable was that around that mould, all of the bacteria had been killed. That was penicillin as we know it today. But what's almost as remarkable was it was another 10 years before any of the big pharmaceutical companies took any interest.
10 years, that is a ridiculous amount of time. So what went wrong? Well, Fleming had to sell the idea to the scientific community, and he had to capture the imagination of the pharmaceutical world. So what did he do? Well, he wrote a scientific paper, and in that paper was tremendous information, was tremendous conclusions. There was lots of great data. So he submitted it, and what happened next? Well, almost nothing happened next because his colleagues ignored him. It failed to get any attention from the scientific community. It failed to generate any interest from the pharma world, and it failed to generate any desire from anyone to invest in this thing to take it forward. And sadly, that's what John and I see in companies all over the world. They've got great products, but they're unable to grow because they can't sell that vision, and they're unable to capture their buyer's imagination.
But there was one man who could sell a vision. His name was Professor Howard Florey, and he was fantastic at attracting investment for scientific research. He'd read Fleming's paper and he saw the potential. And he, alongside the brilliance of his colleague, Dr. Ernst Chase, managed to take this, Fleming's discovery, and make sure it progressed into that mass-produced superdrug that it is today.
Let's go and find out what they did and see if you can do it too.
Look, there's no doubt that Fleming was a hero. In fact, all three men were heroes. They collectively won the Nobel Prize for discovering and bringing penicillin to market. But Florey in chain did something that all sellers have to do that Fleming failed to do. To understand that, let's have a look at some of the characters in this particular story.
Here's Fleming, and he's trying to sell to the scientific community to try and secure funding. So essentially he's a seller and he is a buyer. Over here we've got Florey and Chain. They were successful in securing the cash, but that was 10 years later. So what or why did Fleming fail? Well, what did he do? He provided his buyer with lots of info. He wrote a scientific paper that had great info about which bacteria were involved, what happened to them, lots of scientific information. And these people were impressed with that. But in order to go and get the money, they had to go somewhere else. They had to go to a wider group. They had to go to the pharmaceutical companies, and they also represented the government. And when they went to these players with that information? Well, it turns out these players didn't care about that information, and so they didn't secure funding.
And that highlights two real problems that still exist today in the world of complex sales. Many sellers are bombarding their buyer with too much information, too much data, technical data, feature lists, benefit lists. That's the first problem. The second problem is a lot of sellers aren't considering the wider decision-making unit, and how do they craft a message that this wider group of people really care about.
And that word care is of utmost importance. A deal is never going to happen in any of your sales processes if these people don't care. Now, what was it that Florey and Chain actually did? They did something very special. They created a story called a buying vision that made these people care. Now, Forrester Research have identified that salespeople who can clearly articulate the buying vision will win the business most of the time, 74% of the time. So what is a buying vision?
A buying vision is not about your product, it's not about your solution, it's about your buyer and your buyer's world. And it has some special ingredients. It's got to contain some problems, and it's got to show your buyer that the impact of those problems are so big, so great, that if they don't solve those problems, it could be catastrophic. And that's where Fleming went wrong, because when he was speaking to the scientists, the impact that he was talking about and the problems he was talking about, well, they were relatively small. When Florey and Chain started to look at Fleming's work and unpick all of that technical detail, they actually saw that this linked to a much, much bigger problem with a much greater impact. Millions of people were dying every year from septicemia, from gangrene, from fairly innocuous things like just getting scratched by a thorn, and they believed that Fleming's work held the key to solving those big, big problems.
And that made these people realise, all of them, that they were standing over a big sinkhole that could swallow them up and kill them at any time. They were not on solid ground. Now, of course, there were benefits. But let's look at the sinkhole from the pharmaceutical company's point of view. If they didn't invest, they could be missing out on the biggest investment of their lives. If the government didn't invest in this, then millions of people would continue to die every year. That's what the sinkhole was. But Florey and Chain did something else. They managed to make this impact even bigger. How did they do that? Well, they did two things. First thing they did was show that the world has changed. What has changed about the world? Well, Europe was now at war. They also provided evidence. What did the evidence show? Well, it showed the number of fatalities that would be stopped, the number of injuries and scratch wounds and surface flesh wounds that wouldn't turn into terrible diseases and kill soldiers. So this was now a secret weapon that could potentially win the war.
So how did Florey and Chain manage to direct all of that money into their research? Well, they took Fleming's work, all of that technical information, and reverse engineered that into a story. And this was a story that was purely about the buyer's world. It was amplifying problems and the impact of those problems to the point where these buyers, this decision-making unit, cared deeply about solving those problems. That story, well, we call that a cause to act. It's not about your product, it's not about your solution, it's about your buyer's world.
And in your world, well, when you create this story, perhaps your buyer already knows about some of the problems that you're talking about, but you are teaching them something new. You are developing tremendous credibility. And if you can share this story early on in the sales process, you set an entire context for all the rest of your discovery questions. At the end of the day, Forrester says, get this right and you're much more likely to win the deal.